Hey guys, welcome to a brand new MinotaurZombie review of Thief Gold, also known as Thief the Dark Project, which is the base game. As far as I can tell, the only difference between Thief the Dark Project and Thief Gold is that Thief Gold has a few extra levels thrown in. Now, Thief Gold is made by a developer called Looking Glass Studios, who also would later go on to help with System Shock 2 and was very invested in the System Shock series. Made a lot of great games that never really hit. Always had critical acclaim, but never sold very well, which is very sad. Thief Gold, just kind of a quick overview of the story. There really isn't much of a story here, but shows us Garrett the main protagonist, as an orphan, and he's taken in by a band of thieves when they recognize his talent, which will be very good in stealing stuff. Fast forward so many years, Garrett breaks off from this band and goes off on his own. There, he's basically going to steal and pillage and just make a living with doing his job, which is stealing stuff. That's about the most story you're gonna get. Most of the story is told through kind of lore, like books and things of that regard throughout the game. And there's a couple factions. You know, there's the Thieves Guild that Garrett came from, and there's gangs, and there's a crazy cult called the Hammers. They're all like really relevant to the story, but for the most part, the story's told through the setting. There is, towards the end of the game, there's kind of an overarching story of, you know, something Garrett's got to do. It doesn't happen until pretty late into the game. It's there, but it isn't very critical to the game, I feel, the story. The biggest thing that happens is a plot twist that I put plot twist in air quotes because it's like the most obvious plot twist of all time. Going into the gameplay itself, which is what this is all about, if you guys don't know, Thief is a first-person stealth game, and one of the first ones I can think of. There's always problems inherent to this genre. Mostly the fact that in third-person stealth games, you can swivel the camera around, you can get such a good view of your surroundings, but in a first-person stealth game, you can only see exactly where you're looking, so you can't swivel the camera around corners or anything. You have to lean around corners to actually see the enemies. You see newer games try to rectify this, like Dishonored. They'll give you the ability to see through walls, but then that just kind of breaks the whole stealth immersion, I feel. And Thief Gold just says, fuck it, you're going to have to figure out where everyone is on your own, and just use your own tools. And it's really helped a ton by some great sound design, as far as you can always tell which enemies are what. You know, the random guards will, all funnily enough, be whistling the same tune. I feel like they're taught that same whistle tune at Guard Academy. The hammer haunts, you'll hear rattling chains, you know, things of that nature, and you can always tell where they're coming from, kind of if they're around the corner. It really helps kind of rectify that, so I never ran into too much of an issue. There is an adjustment period if you're used to other stealth games, but I feel like you can get past that. The game allows you to get past that quite easily. Throughout the levels, there's basically goodies strewn around, like goblets, gold goblets to grab, and that increases, you know, your loot. Usually, as an objective, you'll have to collect at least this much dollars worth of loot, you know, to finish the level, which never really that difficult. I only ran into one problem one time doing that. Then on the next level, the shop inventory, which has pre-selected, these are the things you can buy for this mission. You can spend that money and bring things to the next mission. Funny thing is, Garrett seems to discard everything after that mission, and like you can't carry, you know, items from level 2 into level 3, which is kind of weird. Yeah, you get over it. The one thing I really like about this game, as far as difficulty-wise, is it's one of my favorite ways to do difficulty, in that it goes beyond just making the enemies hit you harder and you have less health. It takes the GoldenEye approach, and if you don't know what I mean by that, it basically, each higher difficulty is going to add more objectives that you have to complete before you can complete the level. These usually range basically just from finding another like random artifact or trinket in the level that's worth a lot of money, and it adds a lot to the game. In fact, I highly recommend. I played on hard. There's one difficulty above that, but I recommend you play at least on hard, because otherwise you're probably going to blow right through these levels, and you're going to miss what makes Thief so great. And the thing that makes Thief so great is the exploration aspect of the levels. You're given a map, What I mean by that, you're given a map, and you're never shown exactly where you are at on that map. You'll see a blue, like, highlighting showing, like, you're somewhere in this area of the building. But it'll never tell you exactly where you're at. It's up to you to navigate through these levels and these kind of confusing passageways to find where you need to go. And honestly, that's one of the game's biggest strengths and possibly weaknesses. It heavily encourages exploration. In fact, if you don't explore, you're going to have a really hard time with these levels because you're not going to really be able to complete them. You need to be able to roam around. Now, on the flip side, there was like 2 or 3 levels in the game where they were way too maze-like, and it took me forever to figure out where to go. Like, I ran around, and for the people who watch the Let's Play, you'll know, I mean, I spent like an hour and a half in one level, and I finally had to look up online where to find the trinket I needed for the objective. It doesn't happen very often in the game, but it is there. For people who only play newer games nowadays, it'll probably be a really big turnoff, because nowadays there's always an objective marker pointing exactly where to where you need to go, and if you can't handle not having that, Thief Gold is not the game for you. You will have a bad time. I'm not saying that you're a scrub if you need that marker, but if you do want that marker in your game telling you exactly where to go, you're not going to have fun playing Thief. The core elements of the stealth and kind of the sneaky, hidey, bash them over the head works pretty well. You have a actually really wide range of weapons and tools to deal with things, ranging from you know, a sword, a club to club people out, standard arrows, rope arrows that'll let you climb up things, which is one of the best ideas they had for this game. You can shoot a rope arrow into like a wooden side of a building and climb up and bring out new access points. It really opens the levels up. And that's another great part about the level design, is that the levels are pretty sprawling in that you can take multiple paths to get to your objective usually, and there's usually multiple entry points. I mean, you could be just incredibly stupid and walk in the front gates while the guards bash your face in, or you could shoot a rope arrow to get up to a high window, or you could go around the alley and go in the sewers and go up there. It adds a lot of variety and a decent amount of replayability, I feel. But as for other items, I mean, varying types of arrows, moss arrows, so, you know, very loud tile floors that when you walk on make noise. They won't make noise. For the most part, it's a pretty wide range of items. The only thing that I didn't like about the items was basically the item management. They give you have your weapons, and then you have your items, and you'll get so many items on some levels, and you can really only scroll through them one by one. You can go forward and backward, but when you gotta scroll through like 5 keys, bread, fruit, an apple, a healing potion, just to find like one thing, like a flash bomb in a dire combat situation, it is really frustrating. And honestly, it's a nitpick, but was prominent enough to like annoy me greatly. For the most part, the sneaky part worked pretty damn well. There were times where it's like, you know, you get behind someone and then they hear you, but you feel like you should have knocked them out. Doesn't happen too often. I will say, though, the combat is fairly clunky. And what I mean by that is, you get into combat and you can hold down your sword button to, like, build up power for a big strike. You can keep doing side swipes, or you can block. And I found the block to be relatively worthless. The only strategy I found to like really employ is like, if you're gonna hit someone with a sword, run up to them and start side swiping them with a weak attack, and hopefully you stun lock them and hopefully they go down. People are probably just gonna tell me, well, you're supposed to sneak around, you shouldn't be in combat in the first place. And I agree, but there's a difference between having combat be clunky and a difference between being weak in combat. Being weak in combat still makes it feel like all the mechanics are there. When a side swipe, when there's a spider on the ground, like a tiny spider, and my overhand swing will like always miss it, but my side swipe swing hits it, I feel like there's something wrong. There actually is a pretty wide variety of enemies here. You have like your standard guard, and there's quite a few enemies that are just kind of like sword-toting dudes, but they act differently enough. I mean, some are far more aggressive than others, and they'll vary their tactics up a bit. And then you even have things like zombies that can only be killed if you shoot them with holy water arrows or a few other methods. So there's a surprising amount of enemy variety here, so that actually does help the combat quite a bit and keep it from feeling like a just stun lock 'em fest. For the most part, I mean, like I said, you probably won't be getting into combat too much if you're doing your job right, but there are going to be times where you fuck up, and unless you're save scumming like crazy, you're going to have to fight occasionally, and it's not horrible, but it's not that great. To be honest, the gameplay is all about the sneaking around, the, you know, completing objectives, and this game has some of the best level design I've ever seen. The level of the sword is hands down one of my favorite levels after playing it. It's basically guy's mansion, and the guy's crazy and turned the upper floor of his mansion into like an Alice in Wonderland style place where nothing makes sense, and you're walking on ceilings and shit like that. It's amazing, and there's a lot of levels, there's a lot of variety. You think in a game like this you'd only be in mansions the whole time, but you go from mansion to ancient catacomb to, you know, ancient ruins, back to a mansion, and they'll reuse. I mean, it's not like you go to a mansion once, you'll never go back to a mansion, but they spread it out enough to where it doesn't get stale. They'll put a few, you know, they'll put a cave level, and then, like, you know, go into the center of the earth lava level, and then you're back to a mansion, and by that point, the mansion feels refreshing again. It flows really well, and the level design, I feel, is really tantamount to what makes this game good. I will say there's like 2 or 3 levels that I found very frustrating, but that's because they got too maze-like, and it was just really hard to find things. As for the music, some of you might realize, you know, if you've watched my previous reviews, I like to play music, you know, my favorite tracks from the game throughout the review. There isn't a lot of music in this game, so I can't really do that so much, so I wish I could. But what's there is decent enough. The sound is mostly carried by, as I mentioned earlier, the fantastic sound design of sound effects and things of that nature. The voice acting itself, well, not awful. It was clearly in a time where voice acting was not as important, and I would not be surprised if a lot of the voices were done by the staff of the game. Onto the graphics, they've aged. It's not awful. It's not like early 3D graphics awful. It's not that bad, but they've aged. The good thing is, well, it's not pretty to look at. You can still pretty much tell what everything is, and nothing is so bad that you will be worse off for it in the game, which is where it really comes into play. It's in that time where a lot of the graphics are kind of gray and muddy and early Quake syndrome, but there's still a lot of variety in the designs, and I'm sure, and in fact I would be incredibly surprised if there wasn't fan-made patches to make the graphics better. In fact, I guarantee there is. That's not a question. You know, when you have to install those things, it always looks awkward if you put high-res models in a very low-texture world. Unless they overhaul the textures, too. I don't know. The graphics aren't going to be your downfall if you play this game. They're not that bad. Wrapping this up, is Thief Gold still worth playing today? If you're a fan of stealth games, you owe it to yourself to play this game. I don't think you can consider yourself a stealth fan if you don't play this game, because this is kind of the granddaddy of stealth games. I know there's games that came before this one for stealth, but this is the first one that really, I mean, got really in depth with it, I think, especially in a first-person setting. Honestly, the game is fun. Even if you don't like stealth games, you might still find something to like here, because the game is interesting enough with its mechanics to, you know, give it a try. I will say, if sprawling levels and maze-like levels frustrate you and you don't think you're going to be able to handle that, this probably is not the game for you. Basically, if you can put up with maze-like levels, which was common back in the day, you're probably going to love this game. It's rough around the edges in some degree, but it's good enough on its own to be considered a classic to this day, and a cult classic at that. I certainly didn't regret going through it. I had a blast playing it. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I always forget to mention at the beginning, I don't do scores. If you're looking for a score, go elsewhere. But, as always, this has been MinotaurZombie, guys. And until next time, later.